Commissioner for the Environment.
Thank you. The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the Honourable David Parker.
Mr Speaker, officers of Parliament have to bring independence of political bias. And if there was any doubt that the Right Honourable Simon Upton hadn't left behind his political allegiance to the National Party, then we would not be supporting this motion. And indeed, were that the case, I don't think the government would put him up as a nominee. I think that, sir, that does need to be stated, because one of the, when he was minister, his responsibilities included as Minister of Health for some very controversial proposals to introduce user pay charges into the hospital system that on this side of the House we were very opposed to. But, sir, he left this Parliament in 2001. He since then hasn't involved himself in domestic political affairs. And with his role as Environment Director of the OECD, he's had contact with, I think, many people in this House on all sides. My own contact with him has had him as absolutely independent of any political bias in favour of the National Party or any other party in this House. And so on that basis, sir, the Labor Party reached the view that you can actually move on from this place and come back to roles that are associated with it without actually being in some way tainted by your earlier political career. And, sir, that hurdle, if you like, being overcome, we then were able to deal with whether the Right Honourable Simon Upton had the skills to do the job. And on that there can be no doubt. And indeed, I think there's actually some advantage to New Zealand to having someone who's been out of New Zealand coming back to New Zealand with the eyes of that international experience, actually judging whether we really are doing as well on some of these environmental issues as we would like to think we are. And I suspect that the perspective that he will bring back, which although he didn't draft the OECD report on New Zealand's environmental performance recently, he was responsible for it and came and explained to New Zealand what the OECD saw in respect of some of the issues where we're not doing so well, namely freshwater quality and greenhouse gas emissions. And I suspect the other thing he'll want to get his head around when he gets back is actually the terrible rate at which we're losing soils in New Zealand to sea. The rate of erosion in New Zealand, which is not just filling up our estuaries with silt and has got to such a serious point in New Zealand that our inshore fisheries aren't as healthy because we've got so much turbidity in our close seas that the kelp beds are dying at depths where they used to live, and therefore the habitat and food for fish is less than it was. That's a measure of how much productive soil we're actually losing from our land, which is not good for our long-term agriculture as well as being detrimental to the environment. So I hope that he'll be focusing on those three issues: land use, climate changing emissions and water quality. And I really think that he will make a difference. I think he'll be a fine Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. At the same time, sir, he's actually carrying on a good tradition. We've actually been very well served by our by all of our appointments to the office of the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, and I think Simon Upton will carry on in that vein. As I said, I think this international perspective is important. I know that there are some European countries that have had prior problems, for example, with nitrate limits, nitrate levels in their waterways, notably Switzerland, that have got on top of those problems, and I would like to think that with the wise advice from the new Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment that we can do likewise.
I call Eugenie Sage.
Tanaka, Mr Speaker, thank you.